The secularist orthodoxy also rejects the Judeo-Christian understanding of marriage as a bodily, emotional, and spiritual union of one man and one woman, ordered to the generating and nurturing and educating of children, marked by exclusivity and the sincere pledge of permanence, and consummated by and actualized by acts that are generative in type, even if not in every case in fact. Marriage for Orthodox secularists is a social practice and legal convention whose goal is to support an essentially emotional union, one which may or may not, depending upon the subjective preferences of the partners, be marked by commitments of exclusivity and permanence, one which may or may not be open to children, depending on whether partners happen to want children, and one in which sexual acts of any type, so long as they're mutually agreeable to the partners, are perfectly acceptable and as good as any other kind of sexual act. As any type of mutually agreeable consensual sexual act is considered as good as any other, secularist orthodoxy rejects the idea, common not only to Judaism and Christianity, but to Islam and the world's other great cultures and religious traditions, that marriage is in fact, and not merely by convention, a male-female union. According to secularist orthodoxy, same-sex marriages are no less marriages than those between partners of opposite sexes who happen to be infertile. And as those in the vanguard of the movement for same-sex marriage are increasingly willing to say, the same should be said of multi-party, that is, polyamorous sexual partnerships. A statement was put out a couple of years ago by a group of 300 LGBT activists and scholars and allies called Beyond Same-Sex Marriage, where they were charting the course after same-sex marriage is achieved. And one of the points in the manifesto signed by Gloria Steinem and Barbara Ehrenreich and my own colleague and co-teacher, Cornell West, Professor West and I do a course together at Princeton, but the document they signed said that, among other things, the next step must be the legal recognition of group marriages, that is, marriages in which there are more than two partners. And by this they don't mean just polygamy, where one man is married to Sarah and Helen and Jill, but arrangements where 3 or 5 people in a sexual partnership together are regarded as married. Orthodox secularism, consistent with its view of what marriage is, declines to view marriage as the principle of rectitude in sexual conduct. Again, a sharp deviation from the Judeo-Christian view, and not only the Judeo-Christian view, but also the Islamic view, the Buddhist view, the Hindu view. So Orthodox secularists reject as benighted the notion that sex outside the bond of marriage is morally wrong. For them, what distinguishes morally good from bad sex is not whether it is marital, but rather whether it is consensual. The consent of the parties involved, or as in the case of adultery, other parties with a legitimate interest, is the touchstone of sexual morality. If everybody agrees it's okay, if everybody consents, then there's just nothing that could possibly be morally wrong with it. So as long as there's no coercion or deception involved, Orthodox secularism proposes no ground of moral principle for rejecting extramarital sex, promiscuity, open marriages, and so forth. Now, it's not that all secularists believe that sexual passions should be completely unrestrained. It's rather that they conceive constraints on sexual activity other than the principle of consent as merely prudential in nature rather than moral. For example, there are some secularists who counsel against promiscuity, but they do so not on the moral ground that it damages the integrity of people who engage in it, but rather on the prudential ground that it courts disease, unwanted pregnancy, and general unhappiness, which of course it does. To the extent, however, that so-called safe sex techniques can reduce the risk of those and other bad consequences of promiscuity, Orthodox secularism proposes no ground for avoiding it. Again, no bad consequences of a physical nature, no foul. No harm, no foul. Nothing can be wrong. On the question of the place of religion and religiously informed moral judgments in public life, Orthodox secularism stands for the strict and absolute separation of not only of church and state, but also of faith and public life. No prayer, not even an opportunity for silent prayer in public schools. No aid to parochial schools, even for secular aspects of the mission, no displays of religious symbols in the public square, no legislation based on religiously informed moral convictions of legislators or voters, where this would leave Dr. Martin Luther King, who spoke against the great evil of racial injustice and segregation from a deep and explicit Christian faith. Who knows? If that principle were adopted, the principle that said no public policy based on anybody's religious convictions, the abolitionists, those who fought for women's rights early on in the struggle for voting rights, for example, those who fought against the exploitation of labor, so often doing so out of sincere religious conviction in the name of faith, where would they be? So here secularism goes far beyond the views shared by most Americans, namely that everyone should enjoy the right to be free from coercion in matters of religious belief, expression, and worship, that people should not suffer discrimination or disabilities under civil law based on their religious beliefs and affiliations, and that government should be even-handed in its treatment of religious groups. So if there's funding made available to the Lutheran Church for a soup kitchen or for secular activities in Lutheran schools, it's got to be made available to Jewish community centers and Jewish day schools, parochial schools, and Catholic charities, and so forth. Secularism aims to privatize religion altogether, to render religiously informed moral judgment irrelevant to public affairs and public life, and to establish itself, that is, secularist ideology, as the nation's public philosophy. Orthodox secularism promotes what I regard as the myth that there is only one basis for disbelieving its tenets, namely, the claim that God has revealed propositions contrary to these tenets. Most Orthodox secularists would have us believe that their positions are fully and decisively vindicated by reason, and therefore can be judged to have been displaced only on the basis of irrational or at least non-rational faith. They assert that they have the reasonable position. Any claims to the contrary must be based on unreasoned faith at best and bigotry at worst. Secularists are in favor of a religious freedom that allows everyone to believe and worship as he wishes, but claims based on this so-called private faith must not, they say, be the grounds of public policy. Policy must be based on what secularists have lately come to call public reason. Those of you who are maybe familiar with contemporary work in political philosophy will recognize that phrase, public reason, from the writings of one of the leading liberal political philosophers of the 20th century, John Rawls, the late Harvard professor. Interestingly, there have been two different lines of response by religious people to this myth promoted by Orthodox secularism, that it's only on grounds of irrational faith that their positions can be rejected. Some on the religious side concede that religious and even moral judgments depend on faith that cannot be rationally grounded, but they argue that secularism itself is based on a non-rational faith, that secularism must in the end also rest on metaphysical and moral claims that cannot be proved. In that way, they suggest, secularism is just like a religion and is not entitled to any special standing that would qualify it as the nation's public philosophy. In fact, its standing would be less than that of the Judeo-Christian tradition, since it's not the tradition, secularism is plainly not the tradition upon which the country was founded. On this account, secularism itself is a sectarian doctrine and as such is incapable of fulfilling its own demands of being accessible to public reason. So that's one response. But a second response by people of faith to the myth promoted by Orthodox secularism is to affirm the demand for public reasons, that is, for public policies to be based on reasons that are accessible to people irrespective of their religious faith, and offer to do battle with secularism on the field of rational debate. Those who take this view tend to agree that secularism is itself a sectarian doctrine, yes, but they claim that religious faith, and especially religiously informed moral judgment, can indeed be based upon and defended by appeal to publicly accessible reasons. Indeed, they argue that sound religious faith and moral theology will be informed in part by insight into the authentic and fully public reasons provided by principles of natural law and natural justice. These principles are available for rational affirmation by people of goodwill and sound judgment, even apart from their revelation by God in the Scriptures and in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Based on this view, it's possible for Christians, as John Paul II noted, to join forces with believing Jews, Muslims, and people of other religious traditions who share a commitment to the sanctity of human life and to other moral principles.